Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at why I'm excited for the new Sony a7S III and the reasons, well, why I'm so excited. I've shot on a number of cameras throughout my career so far, and apart from the Panasonic S1H and the Blackmagic Cinema cameras, I've never been more anticipated for a camera release than the Sony a7S III, if you don't count any high-end cinema cameras, which nobody can possibly afford to own. So in this video, you'll be looking at the top reasons why I think it's going to be a great camera, and you're going to see why I think it's going to be a contender for social media content production, as well as high-end production for commercials, narrative film, and more. But before we begin, please hit that like button and drop a comment below. Why are you excited about this new camera? Now let's get into it. The 10-bit codec. Sony have revamped and designed new codecs for the Sony a7S III, finally giving us 10-bit internal in the camera. To people who don't or won't be color grading or doing any special effects work, or really manipulating the color or look in any way, this probably won't matter much to you. But for those of us who regularly shoot on flat or log profiles, it's super important to get as much data to play with as possible. And just to give you a bit of a scientific fact and some information on why it is important, 8-bit images working in an RGB space, red, green, and blue, only work with about 256 levels per channel, I think, if I remember that correctly, meaning it can display up to around about 16 million colors, give or take. 10-bit, on the other hand, works with 1024 levels per channel, which means it can display over 1 billion colors. Yeah, you heard me right. And that kind of jump works in the same way each time you jump from 8 to 10, 10 to 12, etc. And what this actually means for people who want to grade their footage means they're going to have a lot more latitude, a lot more color information between black and white. We'll get less artifacts such as banding, which is the horrible splitting of colors in extreme situations where you push the grade too hard on lower bit footage, especially in highlights, shadows, and skin tones. And for higher end production work, such as commercials or narrative film, you really want 10-bit as a minimum. You can make 8-bit work, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for yourself if you're the editor or colorist, whoever you're offloading that footage to. And you also have to control these expectations with clients as well. For example, if you're shooting a commercial for a client and then they request you to maybe do some special effects work, or they want you to slightly change the footage somehow to give you a specific kind of a look. And you have to make sure when you're discussing the scope of the work that you kind of understand what they're thinking in advance. Because if you do the acquisition in 8-bit, it's going to make your life a miserable nightmare. Just try to get a high bit codec as possible that you can, whether that's renting a camera. A downside to the codecs you could probably say would be the bit rates, primarily in the 4K 120p and in the 1080p 240p. You'll be seeing as high as 400 to 600 megabits per second, and I think actually over 1200 megabits per second for the super slow motion, meaning that you'll be forced to use the new Type A CF Express cards, which are going to be a bit more expensive for your media. However, Sony have been a bit of a genius in this regard, and they've actually included the 8-bit codecs, as well as being able to choose your bitrate and your bit depth options separately, meaning that you can reduce the data rates on the shots where you know you won't be doing much editing, or just to save space, or just to use cheaper media, just like a proper production camera would give you as well. And finally, 10-bit will unlock the true potential of S-Log3 in this prosumer camera, which in previous models such as the a7 III that I'm using now is really difficult to push or stretch in any way because you get horrible artifacts because it's 8-bit footage. Just win-win situation right there. Next up is the bit depth, or the chroma subsampling of the codecs, which is 422 in the new Sony a7S III. Chroma subsampling is done when encoding the image, and it's implementing less resolution for the chroma information than the luma information. I'll explain this in a second. This has been super common, having 420, for example, in a lot of consumer and prosumer cameras, because it saves on file size, transfer times, and transmission times too. And the reason why this has been done is because the human eye has less acuity for color differences than for luminance, the brightness of a color. And now having 422 as an option internally, it means that the Sony a7S III now has a lot more color information as well as that 10-bit codec, meaning that you'll have a more complex image which seems a bit deeper and a bit more natural to the human eye, and a lot less digital too. And this obviously isn't just working by itself with that 10-bit codec, it's definitely going to make editing and color grading a breeze, while getting a nicer array of skin tones and colors. If you actually want to know more about the science behind chroma subsampling, Gerald Undun's done a fantastic video on the subject, explaining the differences and showing some examples between 422 and 420 in the Sony a7 III. I'll link that video in the description below. Reason number 3, 16-bit RAW external recording. I'm particularly excited by this because I use external recorders such as the one that I'm doing right now. I use them to monitor my work when I'm recording in front of the camera like this, or I use it so I can get into different angles, and it just makes looking at the footage a lot easier rather than using the small screen that the Sonys offer. And the biggest advantage of using an external recorder, for me anyway, is so that I can record into an edit-ready codec. I don't have to use proxies, I don't have to try to reduce file sizes in post, which makes it fantastic for lower-end machines, especially when you're out and about, you want to edit on your iPad, you want to edit on your MacBook or laptop or whatever you're choosing, as usually mobile devices tend to have a lot less power for video editing than your primary workstation. And whether or not it's going to be true 16-bit RAW, but definitely check out Philip Bloom's footage. He actually did a video where he was recording on the Atomos Ninja 5, I believe. And it will be interesting to see what other RAW codecs will be available for this camera. I think currently it's ProRes RAW, which will have a huge benefit for editing. But the thing I'm wondering about will be the dynamic range of the camera and these new codecs and the new sensor on the ACES scale. The ACES scale for video is one of the most accurate scales, and it's used throughout the whole professional cinematography industry, with cameras such as the Arri Alexa, the Reds, etc. being rated quite highly on those. And I think Sony have stated 15 stops of dynamic range, usually what the camera manufacturers say, a little bit higher than what it actually is. But hopefully if it's around about 13 stops, it's going to probably do really well, and in comparison to like $100,000 to $1 million cameras, it's going to be pretty damn good. Me personally, I can't wait to see professionals starting to use this camera, such as Philip Bloom, and just produce beautiful cinematic imagery and do professional color grading to see what you can truly pull out of this camera, because I like doing my research. And the last reason, S-Cinetone and the gamma curves from the Cine cameras. Again, this is related to the dynamic range and the texture, the depth of the color that the camera can produce. I'm actually super intrigued that they've decided to give the a7S III the S-Cinetone capability, because that's currently in the FX9 and higher end production cinema cameras, because cinema cameras tend to be able to have a lot more processing power, especially for gamma information and things like that, which tends to give them a more filmic, deeper image to the human eye than say something like a lower end DSLR or mirrorless camera can. They tend to look a bit more video-like. Again, this is something that I'm excited by, because if this is a camera that can produce such high-end images for production studios and media houses, they're going to start using Ms. B cams, crash cams, etc. Or even for independent productions or even high-end commercials and narrative work, you might start seeing this rigged up like a true cinema camera with all the bells and whistles, and turned into a full-on production camera itself, which I'm excited by. And also the inclusion of the HDMI port, a full HDMI port, is a massive step in the right direction. Thank you. So for me personally, I probably will see myself upgrading to the a7S III sometime in the future. I never really rush into purchases like this. I always do my research, and I want to wait to see, at least for the first couple of months or so, professionals producing amazing work, color grading it, pushing it as far as it can, and just seeing the kind of imagery that you can get out of this new camera. Because usually the paper specs are outshone by its practical usability and the workflow that it creates for you. Again, like I said at the beginning, what do you think of the new Sony a7S III? Let me know in the comments below. And please like this video if you thought it was interesting or insightful. It's the first time that I've done a kind of tech news video, but I was super excited about this, so I just really wanted to. And if you do like this kind of video, you might want to follow my filmmaking and lighting playlists, as I've just started experimenting with a few different formats to try and teach people more about video production as well, as I'm always trying to experiment and try different things, especially narrative work, as that's what I'm mainly interested in, and commercials. Well, pretty much anything at this point, actually. And also, if you're into writing, you want to tell better stories, whether that's for a script or for a brand, I've got some playlists which cover some writing advice for writing stories and characters for novels, short films, and more. Otherwise, smash that subscribe button and don't forget to click on that little alarm bell icon so they get notified when I release new content. And I'll see you in my next few videos discussing why I use Scrivener for my novel writing, how you can use Notion and Notability to improve your note-taking, and more tutorials on writing, filmmaking, role-playing, and the tech behind it all. I'll see you in the next one.